Spice. Written by Robert A. Webster. Narrated by Robert A. Webster. Prologue. Pearls of perspiration trickled down Ravoot's face, and the sores on his hands stung pitilessly, as the salt on his sweat rubbed against the worn handle of his machete. He lifted his aching arm once again and hacked into the foliage. His thirst raged, and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, but he had to keep going for the sake of his younger brother. "We're lost, aren't we?" The fear in Owen's voice made him tremble. Ravoot glanced back at the small, dirty face behind him. It was his fault that they were lost. They should never have wandered off the trail. His mother told him again and again never to leave the recognised paths, but he thought he knew better. With his last ounce of energy, he hacked through a thick branch, and the two boys emerged into a small clearing. "We'll be fine," he said, with a jauntiness he didn't feel. "We'll have a rest and then retrace our steps." The boys knew this jungle quite well. It was close to their village, situated within this tropical forest at the foot of the Cardamom mountain range. It was where their family had lived for generations. The villagers lived off the diverse plants and animals found around their jungle domain. The year was 1975, and unbeknownst to the secluded village, Cambodia was in turmoil and in the throes of a dramatic regime change, leading to a period of genocide that would affect every Cambodian man, woman and child. The brothers had been sent into the tropical forest by their mother Rotta to get some trabeck. Collecting fruits and vegetables from the jungle had been a daily mundane task that the 13-year-old Ravoot and 10-year-old Owen had carried out for years. The route was always the same, but that day the boys decided to explore and maybe discover a new area that may contain more vegetables, even though their parents had always warned them against deviating from the marked path. Ravoot and Owen had been roaming around lost for over an hour now in this dense, unforgiving undergrowth. They came across a small glade, so they decided to rest there for a while. They both carried handmade machetes to cut the way through, and the hands were sore from all the chopping. "Look at that, Ravoot," said Owen, pointing to a strange plant they had noticed nestling in a small rocky outcrop at the side of a small cave entrance. The boys went over to the plant, and Ravoot bent down and peered into the cave. "What is it, and how big is it?" Owen was curious. "I don't know. It's dark, and I can't see very far," said Ravoot with his head inside the cave entrance. "I think we may be able to squeeze in, but it'll be tight." "No way," Owen panicked. "Let's just go. We don't know what's inside." Ravoot put his head and shoulders into the narrow entrance. He could fit fully inside, but decided to heed his young brother's advice and not attempt to enter. Owen's attention then shifted to the plant, which he uprooted. The plant had no flower, but the top resembled a gold-coloured poppy pod. Although instead of a flat corrugated disc top, it had a small yellow-coloured sac that looked like a cushion. It had a long, slender stem and was covered in green leaves, which appeared similar in shape and size to a Chinese lettuce, with a small carrot-shaped white root. "I've never seen this plant before. What is it?" Owen said, and handed the plant to Ravoot. "I don't know. I've never come across one either, but maybe we should take it to Mother. Maybe it would taste good," he said, sniffing the plant's top. From what he'd been taught by his parents at an early age about identifying poisonous plants, Ravoot knew the plant wasn't toxic. "It smells sweet." He then plucked a leaf and chewed it, commenting, "It's bitter. Maybe it would taste better when cooked." Suddenly they heard several twigs crack, and part of the surrounding foliage started shaking. The boys were terrified as a young male tiger crashed through the undergrowth and stopped several feet away from them. Ravoot stuffed the strange plant into his pocket, and he and Owen raised their knives, pointing them at the young tiger. The tiger growled and started to pace back and forth in front of the boys. Inside the cave, Owen shouted frantically, paralysed with fear. "Too late, the tiger will be on us," came the whispered reply. "Back away slowly," Ravoot ordered, with every muscle fibre, every sinew alive and ready to react to the moment. They cautiously moved over to a mound of rocks, while watching the tiger pace around, growling and looking at them with disdain. The terrified brothers then edged away towards the thick undergrowth. Noticing the boys were away from his entrance hole, the tiger walked towards it and cocked his leg to spray his domain, refreshing his scent. He took another glance at the boys, nervously edging away, and then crawled into his cave. Ravoot and Owen watched the tiger disappear into the cave and then turned and rushed into the jungle. They stumbled through the tropical forest for about 20 minutes until they came across a clearing that was covered in familiar vegetation. They stopped to catch their breath and smiled. "Great, trabeck. I know where we are now, and we can get back onto our trail," said a much relieved Ravoot. "Let's just get some and go home," said an even more relieved Owen. The bedraggled boys reached the village late in the afternoon. They expected to receive a scolding from their mother. Instead, they noticed that all 85 of the villagers were gathered inside a large bamboo communal hut located in the centre of the village. Confused, Ravoot and Owen decided to sneak past the large open hut. They knew that their father had gone to Kokon early that morning to sell his trinkets and did not expect him back until the following day. However, when they reached home, which was a wooden shack built on stilts, They noticed that their father's bicycle was outside. They went up the wooden steps onto a small balcony and through a large open door. They were surprised to see a small black canvas bag on the table. They placed a strange plant along with the vegetables into a bowl and then headed for the communal hut. "I wonder what's happening?" asked Owen. "I'm confused as well. Why is father home so early? And what was in the bag on the table?" said Ravoot. The brothers made their way to the large communal shack, and as they got to the doorway saw their mother sitting on the floor. The father, who had tears running down his grimy face and a look of terror, was addressing the villagers, who appeared shocked. The Ravoot and Owen went over and sat on the floor beside the mother. "What's happening, and why is Dad speaking to everyone?" "Bong Ren's the village spokesman," inquired Ravoot, who looked at his frightened mother. "Ren is dead, and your father has been telling people about what is happening in Kokon, so be quiet and listen. It is almost finished. We'll explain to you later," whispered Rotter, who, although afraid, tried to appear calm for the boy's sake. Ravoot looked around at the families gathered. Ren's children were huddled around their weeping mother on the opposite side of the room. A few other families who had had relatives who hadn't returned were consoling one another. Ravoot and Owen had missed most of what their father had told the villagers, but observing the faces of those present, they realised that it must be something serious to have created such an immense fear and anxiety amongst everyone. The father, who seemed to have now taken up the role of village spokesman, gave instructions to the stunned congregation to move the village further into the thick jungle. Once he had finished his address, he made his way over to join Rotter and the boys. "What happened, father?" asked Ravoot. "Let's go home, and I will explain." The family left the communal hut as the crowd inside started to disperse and go to their homes. The siblings and their father sat on a straw rug in their home, and while Rotter prepared the food, Tu related his horrific tale to his sons. Tu, their father, along with Ren and a few other villagers, had gone into the nearby Thai, Cambodian border town of Kokon to sell handicraft trinkets to tourists who crossed at the border. Everything seemed normal as they pushed their trinket-laden bicycle through the rugged terrain until they reached the road and then rode into town and along to the border checkpoint. They had been excited and hoped that there would be plenty of tourists arriving. There was a small immigration checkpoint at the border that was manned by military officials, and an area of no man's land which led to the Thailand side of the border. The villagers usually left their bicycles behind the custom post and walked to greet the tourists and pester them to buy until they crossed into Thailand. However, today seemed different, as there were no military at the post and a large fence was being constructed at the checkpoint, with several young men and women dressed in black pyjamas with red and white checked scarves, the uniform of the Khmer Rouge. The Thais had armed soldiers within the no-man's land area, and they appeared anxious. Tu stayed with the bicycles, while Ren went over to inquire about what had happened, and the other villagers went over to await the tour bus. Tu saw Ren approach a Khmer Rouge soldier, who noticed Ren and aimed his rifle at him, and then the soldier started shouting. The encounter was brief, as another Khmer Rouge soldier shouted, and they looked towards an approaching bus. The Khmer Rouge scurried around and waited until the bus came to a stop. There was a commotion as a small group of panicked foreigners got off the bus with their hands raised above their heads and shoved into the waiting Khmer Rouge. The group of yelling Khmer Rouge prodded and nudged repeatedly at the terrified foreigners. Several pieces of luggage and other items were thrown off the bus and hit the small group of frightened tourists. The panicked tourists grabbed some of their belongings, and then they were pushed violently over the Cambodian border into no man's land, being constantly hassled, badgered and shouted at by the band of young Khmer Rouge indoctrinate thugs. Tu witnessed from his sheltered position that Ren and the other villagers were trying to assist the tourists. He saw that the Thai soldiers had shouldered their weapons and aimed them at the approaching party of foreigners, Khmer Rouge and a few helpful villagers. Tu decided to stay where he was and see what would transpire. He noticed several items had been left by the tourists and walked over to the empty bus. He saw that the workers building the fence had their attention firmly fixed on the commotion at the border, so nobody noticed him as he rummaged around the small scattered items. He picked up a small black bag which had seen similar ones on many occasions carried by tourists. It was a camera. He walked back to his bicycle and strapped the case to his handlebars and continued to watch the border drama unfold as the group neared the Thai soldiers, who stood in line and shouldered their rifles. The small group stopped at the Thai border, and the tourists, prodded by the Khmer Rouge, moved forward. The dejected and terrified foreigners ran a few extra feet, and the Thai soldiers broke their formation, allowing them to pass between them into the safety of Thailand. The Thai soldiers then closed the lines, again pointing their rifles at the Khmers, who turned around and marched back through no man's land and into Cambodian territory. Tu noticed that the young Khmer Rouge soldiers didn't appear to be much older than his sons. Ren and the villagers who had gone to assist now seemed to be getting on well, and they laughed and joked with one another as they walked back into Cambodia. Tu was about to go and join them and hoped he would not have been noticed taking the camera. His relief turned to horror as a young Khmer soldier who was walking behind Ren calmly put the muzzle of his rifle to the back of his head and pulled the trigger. Ren knew nothing. He was talking to one of the Khmer Rouge when his face exploded as the bullet exited his head. Wren's torso slumped to the ground, leaving the Khmer Rouge soldiers laughing and chattering as they merely ignored their action and continued walking the last few feet. They were now in Cambodia, and the shocked villagers pleaded for their lives with these nonchalant assassins. Tu was horrified. He began to tremble and felt nauseous, but composed himself enough to remove his trinkets from the back of his push bike. He discarded them and frantically wheeled his bicycle away from behind the border guard box. He walked a few yards, got onto his bike and rode as fast as he could, haunted by what he had just witnessed. He hadn't gone far when he heard an order to stop, being yelled out from a short distance behind him. Although terrified, he ignored the shouting and carried on riding. He heard a shot ring out and a bullet whistle past his ear. Now in extreme panic, he rode as fast as he could, veered off the road and headed across some fields towards the jungle. He entered the rough terrain and paddled as far as he could until the track became too rugged to ride upon. He jumped off the bicycle and went into the thick undergrowth. He stopped behind a clump of trees and remained there for approximately 30 minutes. Hoping he had evaded his pursuers, he retraced his route, recovered his bicycle and made his way back to the road. He continued riding along the road until he found the familiar jungle entrance and the track that would lead him back to the village. Tu told his story to his sons and said they must move the village the following day. He didn't know who these Khmer Rouge were and was unaware of the events happening in Cambodia. He only knew that they should be afraid and make themselves scarce, hidden until he and the other adults could find out what was going on. We'll be safer deeper into the jungle, and tonight we can organise our belongings. We've selected a new site, and in the morning we will break down our dwellings, vanish and rebuild elsewhere, said Tu nervously. The boys could see how concerned, confused and afraid their father had become. What's this? Interrupted Rotter, holding up the plant that Ravut had placed on top of the Trobeck. I don't know. We found it along the track and thought that maybe you would know, and we could eat it. Didn't we, Owen? Said Ravut, looking for his brother's backup. Yes, agreed Owen, as he stood up and took the camera bag off the table and sat back down. He took out a Polaroid film cartridge camera. What's this, Dad? Asked an inquisitive Owen. Tu took the camera, as Rot said. I've never seen anything like this before, as she held the strange plant and inspected it, but was ignored as the two youngsters seemed more interested in the instruction and demonstration their father was giving on the Polaroid. Rotter went over to the rainwater tap and filled a bowl with water and placed it alongside a bubbling pot that contained vegetables and a small broiling chicken. She studied the plant and knew by the leaf shape and colour that the plant was edible, so she removed the leaf and tasted it. Rotter removed the other leaves and placed them into the boiling pot. She pierced the yellow sac on the top of the golden ovule seed pod and tasted it, although she couldn't imagine that the sweet-tasting white milk that oozed from the fleshy capsule would taste good alongside the bitter leaf, so she decided to experiment later, when she had more time to make a dessert. Rotter studied the plant and noticed that the round seed pod had a strange sheen, and its primary golden-brown colour appeared to contain an effervescent mosaic of vivid colours. She decided not to break the round pod open. She was abruptly disturbed by a sudden bright flash. She looked at the smiling faces of her two mischievous sons and her even more mischievous husband, holding the Polaroid and taking a snapshot of her. The camera's machinery whirred as the film popped out, and Tu removed the photograph and peeled away the first layer of film and put the picture on the table to develop. Rotter glowered at her husband as he once again focused, pressed the button and took another snapshot of her and repeated the development process. Tu then motioned them all to get together in order to take another picture with all three of them in. They alternated and took turns at taking pictures until they finished off the 6 remaining films in the cartridge. They watched in awe as the photograph started to develop under the solitary light bulb, and were amazed as the drawing developer started to focus their images onto plain photo paper and become sharper as the minutes ticked by. They put the photographs on the table and chatted about the individual snaps. It was the first time the family had their photographs taken and enjoyed every moment and temporarily forgot about the tragedy that had befallen the village. Rotter removed the banana leaf weave box from a shelf and placed it onto the table. Everyone in the village had several of these boxes. They were interwoven strips of dry banana leaf and coated with resin made from the sap of palm oil bark, giving the box a hard-wearing sheen. These were one of the items that the villagers made and sold to the tourists, although they had a practical use. The villagers used them for storage. This small, shoe-sized box was what Rotter used to store her knickknacks and anything unusual. She opened the box and with the perturbed males looking on as the new form of amusement was being taken away, Rotter placed the photographs into the box. You can look again after we've eaten. Ravut, get the dishes ready and I will save our supper, she ordered. Rotter was about to close the box's lid when she noticed the plant on the table. She cut away the stem and put the golden pod into the box and closed the lid. Rotter served the strange plant's leaves in a broth, and they all agreed it tasted horrible. It was bitter and had little or no taste. Fortunately, the chicken and Trollbeck went down well, and after supper they started to pack away their meagre belongings for the next day's move, and once again looked at the photographs until the village generator went off at 8 p.m. and they went to bed. They were abruptly awoken at sunrise by shouting and gunfire. Panic ensued as Chew, Rotter and the boys went out of the hut onto the balcony and witnessed a group of young Khmer Rouge soldiers rapidly marching into the village and firing off rounds from their AK-47s wildly into the air. They were shouting and hollering at the villagers. Then they separated and started to walk around each individual dwelling that now had the residents stood either on the balconies or at the foot of the stairs. A girl about the same age as Ravoot came to the foot of their steps and yelled at them to come down and go to the village's communal hut. She pointed her rifle at Chew. "Immediately!" she screamed. The family did as they was ordered and went along to the main hut, and along with the other frightened villagers filed into the hut. They were all ordered to kneel down, and a Khmer Rouge soldier, approximately 18 years old, walked to the front and addressed the cowering audience. The people were shocked, as being dragged along behind him on a rope leash was Dara, a middle-aged villager who had gone to Coast Con along with Two and the rest to sell trinkets on that fateful day. "Dara's alive," whispered Two to Rotter. "I thought they'd all been killed." Dara had been badly beaten. Her cheeks and eyes were swollen and dry blood stained her lips and nose as she was tugged like a dog to heel in front of the Khmer Rouge commander. The other Khmer Rouge paced back and forth at the back of the audience as their comrade commander spoke. He went on to explain about Pol Pot and how he was brother number one, their leader, and the Khmer Rouge now control Cambodia, and all citizens were the property of Angkor, the organisation, and they had to work for Angkor in order to stay alive. They were informed about the children's role within this new world order for Cambodia. They would be trained and taught the Angkor way and become like him, soldiers for the organisation, and would be the new people, honoured by all and would no longer need or require parents. The older people would be workers and therefore beneath them. Angkor would now be their family. The brainwashed soldier continued for over an hour in his well-rehearsed speech and informed them that they were to be relocated to a work camp within the Kokon province in order to start making themselves useful part of Cambodia's society. The terrified villagers listened. They were bewildered by this indoctrinated youth, and they all noticed poor Dara swayed as she struggled to stand up in front of him. Occasionally the boy would tug at her rope and she would snap back to attention. After a few hours the boy finished with his speech. He then focused his attention on Dara and the villagers. "This woman led us to you. She is weak, and we do not accept weak." He tightened the noose around Dara's neck and dragged her towards him, grabbed hold of the knot by her neck, lifted her chin to extend her throat, which he then sliced open with a small sharp knife. Dara was too weak to put up any fight, and the sputum and air gargled out of her throat. She went limp. The boy threw her down to the ground, bent over and wiped his knife on her clothing, sheathed it into his belt and calmly shouted orders to his soldiers, and issued a stark warning to the flabbergasted villagers. "Obey Angkor or die." The villagers stayed in horror as the other Khmer Rouge started shouting and bullying them to get their belongings and meet back there in 15 minutes, when they would receive further instructions and segregation. The stunned villagers were headed out of the hut and went to their respective residents to pack. The Khmer Rouge buzzed around the terrified families, hurrying them along. Rotter, Two, Ravoot and Ewan went to their hut. Two spoke to Rotter, who, although shaken by the events, agreed with him, and they spoke to the boys. "You have to escape and hide in the jungle. When we have gone, you can come back and stay here. You know how to survive, and when we find out what was going on, and it is safe, we will return for you," ordered Two. The boys, although sad, agreed, and thought it would be only for a short time. Rotter looked outside and saw one of the soldiers walking away from their hut to check on another. She scanned the area. None of the Khmer Rouge were close. "Quick, Ravoot, you go first," she said quietly, as Ravoot gingerly made his way down the steps, and on reaching the bottom ran towards the jungle and entered the first clump of trees. It was only a short distance, approximately 100 yards, and he stood behind a tree at the front and looked back to await his brother. He saw Owen at the foot of the steps, but marching towards him was a Khmer Rouge soldier, who stopped at Owen's side and started waving his rifle towards his mother and father, ordering them to come down immediately. Ravoot's heart beat wildly. Did they see me? He wondered, as he watched his mother, father and brother being led away. Ravoot, realising it had gone unnoticed, skirted around behind the village, using the jungle trees and foliage for cover, as he observed the goings-on within the village. The villagers were corralled inside the communal hut for several hours, and when they emerged they were clustered together. 4 Khmer soldiers went into the crowd of people and dragged out 4 elderly villagers. Ravoot knew them all well, and hoped they would be left behind, as they were frail and found walking difficult. Ravoot thought that they would spoil him and take good care of him until his parents and Owen returned. The 4 elderly residents were pushed down on the ground and then shot in the head. Screams went up in unison from all the other villagers as the Khmer Rouge pointed their rifles at the panic-struck crowd and prodded at the front few people and screamed, "Silence or die!" The Khmer Rouge commander again addressed the crowd. "Silence," he yelled. He then paused until he had their attention. These people were old, therefore could not produce anything for Angkor. Their lives were of no benefit to Anchor, and their deaths are of no loss. Trembling and afraid, the crowd appeared as a dejected and broken group of refugees as they were marched away along the trail that led to Kokon to join the exodus of rounded up populace to be processed and sent to work camps, to give their existence to the Pol Pot regime. The Khmer soldiers allowed the villagers to carry or wheel their meagre belongings, including Tu's bicycle, which the Khmer Rouge now considered to be the spoils of war, and would relieve them of their possessions at the end of the journey if they managed to survive the ordeal. 2 Khmer Rouge remained, and watched by Ravoot hidden in the jungle, took a tin of diesel fuel from the generator and splashed a little over several of the shacks and the corpses. They giggled as they ignited the incendiary, setting fire to several huts and incinerating the bodies. These merciless and ruthless killers were 13 and 14-year-old children, who showed no emotion or remorse. One soldier was beating the burning corpse on the head with a stick, when he suddenly looked directly at Ravoot. He shouted to his comrade, who grabbed his rifle, and he ran towards Ravoot's hiding place and stopped to look around. "You've imagined it. There's nobody here," said one youth. "I'm sure I saw someone," said the other indignantly. "Do you want to go further into the jungle and look?" "Not likely. I don't know what's in there. Maybe a wild animal. Come on, let's get back and catch up with the others." "Okay, because you're afraid we will go," said the other youth mockingly. They turned and ran back through the village and onto the Kokon track. Ravoot was terrified. He had backed away into a small patch of thick foliage. The Khmer Rouge had only been standing inches away from his face. Ravoot returned to the village just before sunset. He stayed hidden in the jungle undergrowth, too afraid to move, throughout the long, hot, humid day. He walked into the deserted village, passing the cremated corpses, which were now unrecognisable as human beings. He made his way back to his family's hut. Although the Khmer Rouge had burnt down some of the villagers' homes and the communal shack, they had left his home relatively unscathed, and he went inside. Nothing remained. Everything had either been ransacked or his parents had taken with them. He looked around in a numb daze, and still traumatised by the whole experience, he crouched down and wept. Ravoot remained in this position throughout the night, occasionally catnapping, but mainly wondering what had happened and what he must do. Daybreak came and he saw the room getting light. He noticed something familiar in the corner of the room that appeared to have been attempted to be hidden, as only a portion of it protruded from a small hole that had been crudely made in the floor. He got unsteadily to his feet and walked over to the object. He noticed a small wooden hole had been made in the thin wooden floor, and the banana leaf box had been squeezed into it, with the corner showing. He realised that his parents must have been trying to hide this from the Khmer Rouge, and lifted the small banana skin box from its hiding position and opened it. A strange poppy was inside, along with a few other small trinkets, but the most important things to him, the photographs of his beloved family. He removed the pictures and with tears in his eyes stroked the individual images. Ravoot was alone, afraid and confused. He replaced the photographs into the box and left the hut and wandered around the village, searching for any food and water that had been left behind. Passing the small ring gritty remains, young Ravoot went from hut to hut, scavenging and collecting any useful morsels. He found a machete and ate and drank a little. He collected water from rain-catching containers and filled some gourds. Taking his box, machete, and other items that he collected, Ravoot walked through the village and along the track that led to the road to Kokon. He tripped this route on several occasions with his brother and their father. But once his father had got onto the road along with the other villagers and rode away, the brothers had returned to the village. He left the jungle and came into the clearing and headed along the unfamiliar road. He walked alongside the road in case he came across any Khmer Rouge patrols, so he could easily hide in the roadside undergrowth. His 4-hour walk into the outskirts of town was uneventful, and he had seen no traffic or any people. He had, however, noticed that the few homes situated along the road had been destroyed and plundered. He walked along the outskirts of town and headed towards the town centre, which felt eerie without people. He continued until he reached the border patrol box. He hid behind the box and noticed several Khmer Rouge were sitting against a newly constructed fence, which now covered the border into Thailand and was too high to see over. The soldiers were only young, and their serious, lifeless features put a renewed fear into Ravoot. He knew these kids were ruthless killers, and he needed to avoid any contact with them. He walked back into the deserted town centre and went inside a small deserted cafe. He replenished his food and water from the small scraps that remained and sat down to ponder his situation. Night fell and Ravoot still had not figured out what to do. Suddenly he heard a vehicle approaching. Terrified, he hid under the table as an old truck stopped in front of the cafe and a dozen Khmer Rouge soldiers entered. Quaking with fear, Ravoot remained motionless as the young soldier started up a small generator, illuminating the cafe, and they sat down. Fortunately, Ravoot was hiding under a table in a dark corner and stayed silent and still. One soldier brought out several bottles of Mekong whiskey and he started to drink. Ravoot listened while the Khmer Rouge bragged about their daily atrocity. who had slaughtered and descriptive details about how. They spoke of their spoils of war and what items they had managed to pilfer, and then one of them mentioned something that Ravoot wanted to hear. My group went straight to Chung Ek in Phnom Penh. There were maybe a few young Khmer citizens in the group who will make good fighting comrades, said one. We rounded up 4 groups today, and they were all bound for Kokon Province commune to swell our ranks, said another. Nearly all ours were undesirable old folk, so we had to dispose of them, said a third, and added, but we had fun re-educating them. The drunken conversation went on for a short while, as the strong whisky, plus the young age, made them drunk very quickly. They staggered out of the cafe, got back into the vehicle and drove away. Ravoot came out from under his hiding place. The lights were left on, and he could look around for any information on the commune and Chung Ek. He knew of neither, and couldn't read or write, although he did find some small leaflets with pictures which he placed into his box. Ravoot nervously remained in the cafe overnight, and, early the following morning, trekked out of Kokon town and headed back to his jungle village. Ravoot had decided to return home and await his family. He didn't notice that he was being followed, until he neared a road outside Kokon, and a voice behind him hollered at him to stop. He turned around, and a short distance behind him was a young Khmer Rouge girl, pointing a tatty automatic pistol at him, while trying to balance on the crossbar of a bicycle. Come here, she ordered. Ravoot approached the girl, who snapped at him. Why are you not with the others? Where is your village? Ravoot closed in on the girl and grovelled. I'm very sorry, I was left behind. The girl glared at Ravoot. Follow me, she said abruptly, and got off the bicycle to turn it around. Ravoot saw 4 of the Khmer Rouge approaching on bicycles. He panicked, took the machete from his waistband, and hacked at the girl's arm with all his might. The girl could not react to protect herself as she struggled with the bicycle's handlebars and squealed in pain as the knife tore deep into her flesh, hitting bone and making her drop the pistol. Ravoot pushed her away from the bicycle, stuffed his machete into his waistband, got on the pushbike and cycled for his life across some hardened paddy fields. He headed west towards the start of the Cardamom Mountains and the safety of the jungle. He pedalled frantically for what seemed like an eternity. The jungle was further away than he'd thought, and he could hear gunshots in the distance behind him, but he ignored them. He entered the outskirts of the tropical forest and stopped by a clump of trees. He got off the bicycle and went to the perimeter to see where his pursuers were. He saw 4 small dots in the distance still heading towards him. He'd given himself a good head start, but knew he must get to safety within the dense foliage. Ravoot got back on the bicycle and rode through the jungle. He found some small tracks that he could ride through, but after going a short distance he hit the rugged, impassable terrain. So he dumped the bike and ran further into the dense tropical forest. He came across a glade with a small dense canopy, with very little light penetrating through. He had been running through this unfamiliar section of jungle for over 3 hours and was exhausted. He thought he would hide in this area, which would be safe, and he could easily spot intruders. Ravoot remained there for 2 days, living off the bountiful vegetation surrounding him, and, realizing that he had eluded his pursuers, decided to try and find his village. The jungle was his home, and he trekked throughout the night in the clear parts of the jungle when the moon was bright, and rested in the dense jungle during the hot, humid days. He trapped and foraged throughout the early evening until sunset, and then continued his trek. He was lost, and had no direction to follow, unlike around his village, where he knew the tracks, trails and familiar vegetation, which he could use as a guide. On the dawn of the 10th day he came out from behind a row of trees into flat open ground, with a short embankment that dropped down into a shallow valley, and a large flat corral surrounded by a wire fence. There were several rows of square plastic sheets attached with guy ropes acting as bivouacs, along with a few large military-filled canvas tents ranging in size, which were scattered around within the compound. Ravoot could see people ambling around and behind the fence. Some were gathered around in groups and cooking by open fires. This must be the compound the Khmer Rouge had been talking about. I wonder if my family's here. He crept around the perimeter watching the camp's inhabitants until he reached the gated area at the front. He knew he would be exposed in the open if he went to the gate, so he hid at one corner and observed. Sorry about this. I hope you enjoyed this little snippet. Don't despair. If you want to listen to the book in its entirety, you can either buy it at cdbaby.com, or if you don't want to pay for it, just go to my website at www.buddhasauthor.com, go to my contact page, send me your email address, and I'll send you the whole version in the Dropbox, because that's the kind and generous person that I am, and I'm even prepared to forfeit a pair of dapper new flip-flops for your total enjoyment. Thank you all very much for listening.